Welcome back to an episode of Spectator Mode. I'm Neil Strebig. With me, as always, is Donald Double D DeCray.
The hype is so real.
We got another kind of short episode topic wise, but I think we got two topics in the back end we can go a little bit longer on. But we got three new trailers dropped with Star Wars. We'll get to those in a second. We got some new Sonic news, a new video game coming out next year as well. Talk a little about our favorite virtual reality playground, the Metaverse, and some rather alarming news out of that one, if I do say so. And then we're going to finish a little bit on loot boxes and the potential restrictions on those in some nations across the globe. But yeah, why don't you kick us off there?
All right, we're actually looking at three Star Wars trailers have dropped, and we're going to go through all three of them. But they dropped Andor, which is going to be a series on Disney Plus. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is going to be a new game released by EA, and they've also officially confirmed and released a trailer for The Bad Batch Season 2. So, starting off that list, we're looking at Andor, which is supposed to be focusing on Cassian Andor's, quote, journey to make a difference, or the difference he can make. So this should be sort of like the beginning of the rebellion against the Empire. We got some Senate shots in there, so it looks like we might get to see, Sheev, Palpatine, the Senate, maybe, might make an appearance, is in the rumor mill. Would be kind of cool to see that. I don't know. Of the three, I guess I should ask this question at the end. Of the three, which one is your favorite? So, with Andor, what are you looking forward to?
I think I'm looking forward to being able to see a planet, have to submit to, the Empire coming through. We've kind of already seen the Empire taking foot. In Solo, we kind of saw an ongoing battle, but that was brief. I don't think we've actually ever seen the Empire, infiltrate an actual planet and then take over and see what that does to an entire country and the culture. I think that's a really cool kind of thing to see and see how populations fragment split up. Are some submissive? How does kind of the Rebel Alliance kind of start just on a singular planet? And how do people stand up to the Empire coming in and restricting them? So I think that'll be really, really cool and exciting. Uh, with that being said, is it going to be 6 episodes? I think it can work. The Obi-Wan thing kind of bothers me at 6 episodes after this last week. So I'm curious to see how much you can kind of build within 6 episodes.
All the thing depends on the length of the episodes too. I mean,
Yeah, I
Netflix
don't
with
know.
their
I think
Stranger
eight
Things has
is
gone to like hour 20 episodes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think eight is like a good at least for a shorter series. 8 to 10, I think, is kind of that prime zone. So, but again, that's more so coming from me wanting to see more as a fan though as well. So I get that's a bit of a selfish take on my end. Not that they're bad by any means. It's just want to see more. I guess the least excited about is probably Bad Batch because I haven't watched the first season, so I don't really.
I mean,
I'm a bit
I'll be honest,
disconnected
I
there.
haven't either watched the first season. I think it got pretty good reviews though, all
Yeah,
around.
yeah. No, I mean, I like Clone Wars and everything else. I haven't watched the first season, so it's one of those of like, okay, cool. Sure, I'll enjoy it when I watch it, but not exciting. But on that other side, then on excitement, yes, I think the Survivor trailer and actually following up there, I'm excited about that. I mean, there was some gameplay issues, I think, with Fallen Order to a certain extent that kind of got repetitive or annoying. I'm sure they're cleaning that up, but I don't know. I'm excited to see where they go with that. And I think it's again carrying on kind of with Andor and after again, kind of the Rebel Alliance in the fall of Order 66. I think that entire storyline, for me at least, since I'm a fan of the Sith versus the Jedi and lightsaber battles,
So
anything in that vein, I'm excited about.
I think I actually want to pivot the conversation just a little bit because one of the things that often concerns me personally is like how densely packed are the narratives. Now, on the one hand, absolutely, Star Wars is a very large universe, so there is a lot of room to play around in things. At the same time, if you keep visiting the same sandbox all the time, I think it becomes in some ways constraining, and then you're starting to like rehash elements of the same story or like retell them in just different versions of the same story. You know what I mean? So like I think it becomes more challenging to find original storylines because you keep coming back to the same time periods, the same characters, the same, the same set, so to speak, for the context of it. And I think that my question to you here and to anyone listening as well is like, do you think there is a real issue with the Star Wars blitz that seems to be going on of oversaturating this time period in Star Wars, or do you think they have enough to work with in the universe at large that they can have all these different distinct storylines that'll still make good stories but still linked together?
I think there's enough there, but I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about was the last episode or 2 episodes ago with kind of the generations of Star Wars fans. I mean, this is the base of what most Star Wars fans are. It's, the original fans and then, our age group as well. And I think for the new fans that, first introduction was Force Awakens, new trilogy, it gives them more backstory of what's going on. So I do think this is the sweet spot. There is probably saturation point, sure, because people always argue about, is there a Star Wars problem on Tatooine? And it's kind of where you always go back to, but that's the reference point. I mean, it just is what it is. A lot happens. Sure, you could go through the weeds and be like, did all this happen in the timeline, whatever else. There's a million different planets, sure, but like we know everything kind of happens at Tatooine, and people end up going there, and it is what it is. But I think, if anything, it comes down to how they want to split up again the starship battles, bounty hunters, Sith versus Jedi. And I think that's more so where, like, if we get too much of one certain area, I guess that's more the saturation point rather than the actual era it's in. I think going back in between episode 3 and episode 4 and that gray area, I do think is rich because there's a lot of things we just don't know. And I think it's intriguing to see people setting up the Empire and getting a better sense too of how strong the Empire is. Because in the movies, it is this kind of a vessel. We get the idea that they're super powerful, but we don't really see that crippling force and might that Vader built them up to and Darth Sidious built them up to. So I think it's, I don't know. Now, maybe I'm kind of going on a tangent
No,
here, but I
no,
think
no.
it's there's enough there. I
It
think
definitely
that
is sort of a skip forward, I think, in time from like the Empire's rise and fall, so to speak, in terms of, Sheev takes the Senate. Those are the prequel movies. Palpatine is in control of the Senate, and then, we essentially jump forward in time to Luke's story where the Empire is established. There are rebels fighting back, but the Empire is in control of everything. So like we leave at the very beginning of like maybe the official founding of the Empire as a power and pick up the main storyline in the original 6 movies with the Empire established. So there is a nice time gap in there that I think can be explored. But like I said, like I'm my concern a little bit is like they keep coming back to that time gap, filling in those holes a little bit. The Kenobi series fills in some of those gaps. I think Bad Batch even explores some of those gaps. Andor is definitely going for that again. And like Rogue One had certain magic to it. If I'm remembering correctly, that was the one where they got the plans
Mhm.
for the Death Star. And it's one of those things that like in the movies, you might not ask yourself, well, how do they know the weak spot? Like, where did this come from? But that one little act being so crucial to the overall story and everything else, you know what I mean? Really did a good job of I think, presenting this idea that like there were tons of smaller heroes along the way. And, Luke maybe steals the credit almost in the end when tons of people were putting forth effort and stuff in the Rebel Alliance for a long time before he came along. But then it feels to me like tone wise, we're coming back to that a little bit of the underdog story, these little people basically that are fighting back. And like we're sort of revisiting that a little bit and rehashing major characters. Like I like B tier characters getting fleshed out a little bit more, I think. What I mean? Like they're big enough that like like the Boba story and stuff like that. The Mandalorian stuff I think is a good example of like who they are, but they didn't have a lot of backstory going on to begin with. So you've got a lot that you can do with them, kind of to develop them. Nothing wrong with the underdog and the little man story or whatever you want to call it, but my concern is that we might see too much of it, if that's possible. But I don't know.
Yeah.
My own misgivings aside, I think we're going a little bit long. I'm just curious what anyone listening thinks as well. Do you think they have enough to work with in that time period? Or do you think that they should begin exploring other storylines in the Star Wars universe?
Gears, but I
Yeah.
guess massive world building to some extent. First, kind of look at the new Sonic game, Sonic Frontiers, which was supposed to release this year or be out next year, part of Sega's kind of anniversary special, a bunch of remastered Sonic games coming out. But the newest installment will be Sonic Frontiers, which is an open world Sonic game. IGN had a good, about almost 8 minute kind of look at gameplay and whatnot too. I'll have to drop a link on the comments once this is live for y'all to check it out. But what's your thoughts on it? You intrigued by it? You gonna buy it?
I'm going to wait for reviews after release. Absolutely. Because I have a lot of apprehension. Like Sonic going, like the format I think was very clearly established in 2D with the side scrolling kind of stuff. And Sonic worked very well in that format. I think its forays into 3D have been hit and miss all around. I haven't been like super thrilled or thought they were super consistent, honestly. But This takes it a step further now with this idea of trying to introduce open world gameplay, which again seems to be like a trend in gaming that things are moving towards this open world stuff. But like I think you really need to have a sit and think of like what's the game we're putting together? Does open world fit what we're trying to do with this game? Does it make sense? Cuz like I'm my big curiosity here is like, so are there just not levels anymore to clear? Is that not a thing anymore? I guess it's going to be narrative based and you're going to try to beat enemies. Like, I'm trying to understand sort of how they're going to translate the Sonic game into 3D with it still being fundamentally a Sonic game. And also, like, mechanically looking at it, there seems to be like a lot of snapping going on in the gameplay trailer of him like sort of like snapping onto jumps or grinds or whatever you want to say, rail, like literally rails in some cases. And like for me, again, that's one of those like, well, if it's going to be snappy like that, I question the challenge it presents because it kind of has to, in some ways, like automatically do that. So again, like, is open world 3D the way to go for the Sonic franchise?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised we are pretty much in agreement with this. It looked relaxing, the music looked relaxing, sure, but my first thing was like, I wouldn't play this. I'm not excited. And granted, I had a Super Nintendo and not Sega, so like, not growing up with Sega Genesis. Immediately, I'm not a huge Sega fan, and also I have to go with my mustache brother and with Mario, so like, it is what it is. But I'm with you. I do think Sonic, for me, the platformer for Sonic, it's about speed and timing, and the enemies make more sense, and the level clearing. All these Sonic open world games really turned me off. I've never been interested. Going back to the Dreamcast and kind of they first try to do it, it's just it's not the same. And to your point too, it looked like basically Tony Hawk, and I'm just grinding on rails. And it's like, what really is the challenge? Sure, it's relaxing and stuff, but there's really no meat here. And Sonic's lore isn't that in depth for an open world game either. You know what I mean? It's the Sonic facing robots. If you shrink the world down and make that compact, speed matters. You know what I mean? That's what makes it intriguing to me. So it's like you go all the way out, it doesn't make sense then. You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, he's super fast, but there's this massive world. You don't feel the speed, it's just become
Yeah,
very linear.
I mean, I think like it's one of those things. Like, one, how do you do Sonic enemies the way Sonic traditionally kind of has done them, right? Like, you put enemies that are stationary, and then again, you have to like grind a rail and jump them or hit them or something. So like they're in your way, but then you have a forced path to go, which kind of defeats the purpose of the 3D open world stuff. Then if there's like this required literally rails sometimes that you have to travel on, or do the enemies move in the 3D world that you can, but then that opens up the idea that you can just go around them. In which case, do they move as fast as you do or have projectiles that do, which kind of invalidates the speed of the character. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I have overall, I'm not feeling positive on it. I'm not looking forward to it very much. I will wait for reviews on release to render a final decision. Talking about bad feelings. is that a,
Open worlds,
is
yeah.
that a transition for you, right? An open world, yeah. There was a researcher who was playing around in a Metaverse platform owned by Meta, and she was sexually abused in the Metaverse. She says her character, her avatar, was raped, and other users harassed her, sexually harassed her, and abused her. And it's one of those questions of like, what is the metaverse? Where is it going? What kind of regulation exists, especially if we're looking at a world that is in some ways completely anonymous, completely divorced from real consequences the way we understand them in the real world. It's kind of like, what's going to happen? Because it seems like metaverse is shaping up to be just not good and almost a safe haven for these literally illegal behaviors, right? Like, that's what they
Yeah.
are. There's no in between.
I mean, there's a lot to this story that you sent me, and part of it too was the researcher turned off parameters that allow somebody to get within like 4 feet of your character, and she was kind of egged on to do that. Everything else, and that resulted in the sexual assault within a virtual reality world, which is kind of crazy. But even too, like reading the researcher's report, she was even just like, "What the fuck is going on?" Like the controller's vibrating, like she knows it's fake, but it's also like, "What the fuck? Should I stay in this because it's fucking research?" And also the uncomfortableness of like, just again, it's pretty jarring thing no matter what, even though it's not real and it's just there's sensory stuff going on no matter what. I think it poses a big thing with the metaverse. I was kind of shocked to see the board of directors not wanting to do any more kind of research into psychological trauma, which I think is a massive red flag. I thought it was, though, somewhat encouraging that some of the investors, though, were like, hey, if we don't have the safety parameters, we're going to pull out, tens of billions of dollars we've invested in this platform if you can't, make it safe. And it's not like Facebook has the best track record on parameters and safety at all.
No.
It's more of just kind of direct profits. So I think there's a lot. And again, I do think we should note too, it's about 300,000 users in this virtual reality game they used. I forget the exact title of the game. I should have wrote that down before we recorded. But the game they were in was only about 300,000 users. And this incident took place, I think, with three other players that assaulted the researcher. And they noted another incident too, which was about five or six people as well involved. So it is, a small percentage from what we've seen, even in that 300,000 realm. But I do think the metaverse and virtual reality opens up a gauntlet of people just being animals because it's like, think about people play games. They play absolutely different than how they would. They play more violent or ruthless in a game than if they are a polite person in the real world too. So I don't know. It's very troublesome and bothersome to me. Like, I don't know. VR is not my cup of tea to begin with, but like
every sci-fi movie has warned us of what this is looking to become.
Yeah.
Because I think a couple of the things that stand out, number one, are they can obviously introduce more controls, but I don't think the researcher fully understood that, like, by allowing the proximity change, immediately was an opt-in on everything that would go along with that. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm opting into sex or violence or anything else that somebody can do within 4 feet of my avatar is now allowed because of that one feature, which, like, there's so many things I can imagine someone wanting to do in a virtual world, not including those, but within 4 feet. You know what I mean? It seems like there should be more, I don't know, stages, more options there to sort of like what you're consenting to and not consenting to that your character can get involved in. Some of it is also like, why are we programming certain things? And I guess they understand who's going to be using their platform, maybe. And I don't know what that says. But then there's like the very like real stuff that like you can't control regardless of just like the words being thrown out, images that will be shown, graffiti and stuff like that, or like other users simulating violent or sexual acts on their consenting avatars, but now you have non-consenting viewers. You know what I mean? Like, how do you police any of that stuff? You know, there's so much more to this than just the fact that they interacted with her avatar inappropriately, that I don't know that there is a way for Facebook to potentially, or Meta, I guess, to regulate this in a way that's going to be safe for everybody involved. I don't know. Maybe I just don't have the creativity for it, but it seems like it's going to be a bad recipe for a lot of reasons.
No, I'm with you. And I think more so than capacity and bandwidth to do it, I don't think Facebook really cares to implement it. I think they just put it on the onus of the users, which again is very dangerous because you're not going to have adults using this. I mean, yes, you're going to have adults involved, but there's going to be kids and youth involved as well. That's like, you need parameters in place. It's not just parental controls, it's just basic parameters. Introducing a brand new technology, you don't go 100 miles an hour first. It seems like that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the point to younger users as well are going to be large on the platform. People who are growing up more tech savvy are going to, I think, have more interest and investment in this type of thing. And I think that might actually be a good way to transition to our final topic here, which is that the EU is looking at banning loot boxes for the entire European Union, but 18 European countries specifically have joined on to call for the ban on loot boxes because, it's basically gambling, it's predatory practices, and again, the games themselves are looking at kids who very often don't know better than what they're doing. And it also is, it's I think there's long-term consequences to people getting hooked on this type of stuff, this sort of feedback loop that's created early on when they're younger and stuff, and what that might look like as they grow as gamers. So I think you did a lot of research on this in terms of which countries and what games might be affected, right?
It was Norwegian Consumer Council report was the initial report that kind of started this. Some countries already basically banned and outlawed Diablo Immortals. It was Belgium and Netherlands as far as loot boxes are concerned. But in response to the report, it was Austria, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Iceland, Italy, Latvia, Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. all were like, hey, let's look into restrictions, or they've already taken actions to ban certain loot boxes from certain games. FIFA was predominantly used in the case study, which does make sense. FIFA, even though it's not apparent, it's again kind of the idea that you're paying for legendary loot boxes or gear. The percentages aren't as advertised, which is also a problem. We've seen a bunch of reports too with associations with gambling with loot boxes. Overall, I think it amazes me how many steps and how many countries in Europe, or at least discussion wise, even if this action is not taken towards loot boxes. And here in the States, it's like we're still arguing if video games, coincide to violence in the real world, which is like how many studies have debunked that, but the actual issues we still can't wrap our heads around.
Yeah, because I think it's. I mean, on the one hand, you can say I'm cherry picking. I am to make the point, but there are people who get really in the hole with these types of games, like investing way more money than they should because it is a gambling experience. It does play off of gambling addictions. You know what I mean? And then like just on the other side of it, I think this also bothers me in the sense of you're paying full price for a game, but you're not getting full enjoyment unless you pay more to hopefully get lucky in the loot boxes. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
some early measures here have been like you have to publish drop rates, it has to be understood and stuff. Like people have to know what the actual odds are. You can't just like say that this is a thing because like there have been misleading cases where they're like, oh no, this is gonna happen. And I think you mentioned FIFA. There was a character who was supposed to be introduced, I think, in the loot boxes, and for the first like day or something, they had a bug where he wasn't actually. You couldn't get him. So many people dropped tons of money buying those loot boxes, trying to unlock the character, and it just wasn't possible at the time. And users were obviously upset, but like, what can they do? Because the practice itself of loot boxes and you never had a guarantee. No matter how many drops you had, there was no guarantee that you would ever get the character in the first place. But same thing as if you're playing a casino, it doesn't matter how many times you play the slots, there's no guarantee you're going to walk away a winner. So I think it's a real concern. And the thing, it's one of those things that like, why isn't this conversation happening in the States? To your point of like, we're still talking about things that have been researched and debunked ages ago. I feel like we're living in the times of Dungeons and Dragons is a demonic cult type thing with video games cause gun violence in the States, apparently. Why do you think we are behind on this so massively?
Well, I think one, I mean, not to go too crazy, but it's also America has a lot of lawmakers and policymakers that are disconnected from current events happening. They haven't lived in generational concerns at all. And they're trying not to do any research on it, really, it seems. It's just kind of the shit the wall. And again, two-party system has its own issues. But in terms of video games, I do think it's to your point. I don't think many Americans understand how many people play and how big the industry is basically the stigma and not taking the violence part of it, but it's basically like, yeah, video games are still nerdy. It's not as popular as it is. It's not as big as an industry as it is, which is funny for a nation that's so rooted in capitalism. It's like you can't look at the largest industry in the world right now, well, one of the largest industries in the world, I should say. I shouldn't misspoke that much, but and to me, that's kind of crazy. But I don't know if the loot box argument will ever really get too much traction in the States because even to you look at cell phones and I forget the gaming company that isn't one in the world, but it's largely built on the same premise. You know what I mean? Your kid has an unlocked phone. They're just hitting a bunch of buttons. And next thing you know, you dropped a couple $100 on, Candy Crush. Loot box is essentially the same premise. It's disguised as, in-game currency, but sometimes kids won't know that they're spending real world money to get this stuff. And again, it also fuels a bit of an addictive nature of like, oh yeah, if I just spend some money, I'll get this. And if you don't get it, it's like, well, it was only $2. I'm going to do it again. Well, do that 10 times there. Boom, that's $20 right there. It goes pretty quick. And again, it also is just like, well, it wasn't that bad. It's only $20 this time. And next thing you know, a month goes by, you drop maybe $100 or so. It's a slippery slope. And again, there needs to be parameters in place, or at least restrictions or better definitions of like, hey, this is what this loot box will get you. These are the probability wise, or just limiting it to then, hey, you get the battle pass. I don't know, even just flip flop some of the rewards. Cause that's the thing too. You look at most of the games, most of the battle passes nowadays, it forces you to basically want to get the battle pass because you don't really get anything for free. So if you're playing and putting a bunch of hours in the game, it is just like, well, I'm playing all this much, like, why not? And I do think that's fucked up. And again, kids and youth, if it's easier and you're just bugging your parents, just going to dip money into it. So there's that trap thing as well.
Yeah, because I think there's 2 points that I'd like to make here. And the first one is when you look at studies on gambling and like these types of predatory monetization practices, the companies then typically exist off of whales. There are few users who go and spend exorbitant amounts of money on them, which I think clearly shows the fact that, you know, while some people might be able to spend a little and walk away okay, like they're definitely taking advantage of people who are, you know, prone to gambling addiction and spending and everything else that goes along with that. And they're capitalizing on a vulnerable population. That by itself should not be cool. And then I think the second part here is, again, for me, like, we're not getting complete games. You know, like cosmetics and stuff like that, I kind of have a different attitude towards, because your gameplay experience isn't really, fundamentally different having cosmetics. You might like it, you might want to support your company, you might want to rep your character or your team or your colors or whatever. Like, to me, that's kind of a different experience than like unlockable characters or unlockable equipment, stuff like that, that like is going to change the way you play the game or the experience you have playing the game in a fundamental way. So, you know, it feels like we're kind of taking it on both ends, because you have to pay up front full price for the game. The game's no cheaper on release with loot boxes. You know what I mean? So you're paying full price for it, and then you're paying again to unlock all the stuff that you feel like you need to. And then in some games, depending on what the meta is, you might need to have certain things to be competitive to a certain level. So you either have to resign yourself to being a casual because you're not willing to dump the money in to unlock the things that you need to be competitive in like ranked play or something like that. You know what I mean? And so I'm just getting so fed up with piecemeal games, half-finished games, or pay more to unlock the full games. I mean, geez Louise, man. Like, we're really entering a dystopia of gaming, I think.
No, I'm with you there, but again, I don't, until America kind of looks at video games different, I don't know if it's ever going to be on the forefront. We're kind of stuck again in this dark age of video games and violence, especially, unfortunate mass shootings happen, and we don't really talk about just the culture of gaming and, again, how much money and investment's going into it. And again, to me, that's kind of shocking, because you would think, okay, a bunch of money's going into it, look into it. But it's like we just have blinders up, and I think it's more so of a lot of folks just, for whatever reason, don't take gaming as serious as it is in the States.
Yeah, it's one of those things, for as large of an industry as it is, for as many people engage with the gaming industry, participate in it either in small form or large, in mobile or on console or on PC, like, it's one of those things it's not going away. It's only growing. Gaming is becoming more and more accessible. It's reaching more platforms. And, you know, if I have any kind of a voice, let's take this as a call to action for what you said exactly of, let's research this, let's look at this, let's get some better understanding of what the effects of all of this is, instead of kind of turning a blind eye to stuff that we, in some cases, know does cause issues like loot boxes. So on that incredibly bleak note, I think we can bring this to a close. Overall, I think the Metaverse, Sonic, and loot boxes aren't exactly the happiest topics, but the Star Wars stuff I think I am looking forward to overall. So I'm going to focus on that personally, and I'm curious what anyone thinks would be their, of the three, Andor, Jedi Survivor the game, and Season 2 of Bad Batch, which of the three you're most looking forward to. If you want to leave a comment, would be intriguing for me. Right? So yeah. I think that's going to do it for Neil and I. And thanks for listening to Spectator Mode.